Hello, all my Golden Hill Eagles. I hope you're staying healthy and safe and everyone's doing well. Today I am going to show you how to create your own weaving from just, again, materials that you should be able to scrounge up around your house. So again, everything I'm using is just stuff that I have here at my house. It's recycled materials. You will need a pair of scissors, but other than that, for art supplies, it's just scrap paper and cardboard from like cereal boxes, that sort of thing, and a pair of scissors. Now, for my kindergarten, first graders, you may need a little bit of help from an adult at home to get started, but then after you have things set up, you should be able to give this a try. So I'm going to turn my camera around and get us set up for today's weaving lesson. You'll see that I have 3 vocabulary words, and of course, you know me, I always like to tie in even a little bit of math to our lessons, but today we're going to be learning about what part of a weaving is called the warp. There is another part of your weaving called the weft, and we're going to be working with patterns. Some of my 3rd and 4th graders, I'm going to ask you to really kind of wow me with your patterns. For my K and 1 students, I know you have learned or are learning about what's called an AB pattern. And if you remember, patterns repeat. So if you're thinking about an AB, after B would come A again. In weaving, we just are going to refer to that pattern as going over, under, over, under, over, under. So you're going to be repeating. You can even repeat the colors that you choose for your weaving, but really we're just going to focus on that over, under of a pattern. So I'm going to move these out of the way for the moment. But let's first talk about warp. So the warp is the first part of the weaving that we need to create. And essentially what you're going to want to use for the warp, I suggest, is a piece of cardboard that comes maybe from like a cereal box. I have like a box from Butter here, that sort of material, the cardboard. You don't want something from like a box that maybe something was shipped in. You want some sort of food container that's a little bit heavier than paper, but thinner than a big heavy cardboard box. You can even see I've got a Wheaties box here that I have already cut up for one of my projects. So you're definitely going to want to find yourself a piece of lightweight cardboard. If you don't, if you just have paper, you can make your warp out of paper. But really, for those of us learning how to do a weaving, and you can see right here, here's a finished one that I just created this morning. And the warp, you can see, is just that part of the Wheaties box. So the warp is the cardboard part. But again, if you don't have any thin cardboard, you can, be looking for one, hold off on your weaving till you get one later in the week. Again, there's no rush to get this project done, and it may actually take you a couple of days to work on. So back to the warp. So the warp is the piece of cardboard. Now you can make it small and skinny, but really for my beginning weavers, I'm going to suggest you cut yourself a nice big square or rectangle to make your warp out of, so that you have plenty of room to really get those fingers learning how to weave and going over and under. So I'm getting my piece cut now. Now it doesn't have to be in a square or rectangle, but that tends to be what I stick with. Now I'm going to turn it over so that I'm just on the inside, and then you're going to fold your piece of cardboard in half. So I'm going to fold it just so that picture is on the inside. So we're going to make a fold and press it down to make a crease over here. And now this is where you might need to have an adult help you out a little bit. You want to make sure that in a moment when we start cutting the strips for our warp, where we're going to be eventually weaving under, you want to be cutting from the folded, the creased side, not the open side. So you can see that's this closed folded side. Now I'm going to use a marker so that you can see the lines that I've drawn. You can simply have an adult just cut these lines, or if you want to use a pencil so they don't show up too much afterwards. And what I'm doing is I'm starting a line on the folded side, but I'm stopping a little bit from the edge. It's almost like I try to leave almost like 2 fingers space. And you don't want to make your lines too close together again, because then it makes it a little bit harder when you're learning how to weave. And again, I try to use like 2 fingers together. Let me go from this side, the shadow from my light. So about 2 fingers space between. And I think I'm going to stop there. I don't think I'm going to put one down at the bottom. So you don't have to use a marker. You can use a pencil. But then I'm going to keep it folded. So I'm keeping the cardboard folded, and I'm just going to take my scissors and now cut through, and I'm stopping right where that line stops. Now this cardboard is a little thick, so this is where again you might need to have an adult just help you to get this part set up. So this is your, what is it again? What do we call this? This is the warp that we are making. So once you get your pieces cut, you can put the scissors aside, and then you just open it up, and you'll see you've got the strips, the warp for your weaving right here. So if you ended up with lots of individual strips, one of 2 things might have happened. You might not have cut from the folded side, or again, you don't want to cut all the way through. You need to stop before the end. And if it doesn't work out the first time, grab another piece of cardboard. I suspect you've got some sort of cereal box or something that you can use. So that's our warp right there. And I'm just going to move it aside. Now we need these strips right here, what we call the weft. And let me get my weft. So that's what that's called, the weft. The weft are all of the strips that we're going to weave into the warp. Now, you can create your strips out of many things. If you have some scrap white paper, and you can see this had another picture on the back, you can use different coloring tools to add your own designs to a white piece of paper. If you have markers, crayons, you could make a whole picture, fill it with patterns and designs. I also, in my planner from school, I had some leftover pieces of photocopies that I turned over. You can use something like that if you have schoolwork. It might even be interesting if it has your handwriting and stuff on it to use that side. Now, if you also get magazines in the mail, this came from just a catalog that you can see just has different pictures of rugs, but I like the patterns on the rugs. So you can make your weft, your strips, just by simply cutting some scrap pieces of paper. Now again, make your strips, especially my kindergarten and first grade students, you want to make these pretty thick so that they're easier to hold on to. So I can use my magazine picture. Maybe I want to cut a nice strip out of this colored paper that I've created there. And I'm going to stick with some thicker strips for my beginning weavers. So once you've got some strips cut, your weft, remember, these strips are called the weft. We're going to now get into the fun part, which is where we bring the warp and the weft together for our weaving. So, oh, another tip too, if you have extra cardboard, this came from, I think, an Indian food box. We love Indian food at our house. You can even cut those into strips too. This is a little bit heavier, especially when you're first learning how to weave. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to work on creating a pattern. And we've talked again about that A, B, A, B. We're going to think of it as over, under, over, under. So the wonderful thing about having this out of cardboard is it's nice. I can kind of lift it up and it's a little stiff. So I'm going to take my first weft, my first strip, and I'm going to go over the first section and take my fingers and lift up the second. So I'm going over, under. I'm going to go over this next strip. So again, I'm going to now take my hands and I'm going to push my weft under. So I went over the first, under, over, under. And now what comes next in my pattern? Over, lifting up, going under, and then finally going over. Now the tricky part is just kind of when you get your weft, your strip all the way through and they're done, you want to make sure you slide it up as far as you can and then choose your next strip. So maybe I go over and I take one of those I have used from the magazine. Now last time I went over when I started, so I want to do the opposite this time. So this time I'm going to lift up that first strip and go under, then over, and again lift it up and go under. So I'm doing the opposite of what I did the first time. So where I went over the first time, this time I started under, over, under, over. Lift up, go under, then over, and then under, and then pull it through. And this part's a little tricky, especially if you've used something like magazines. This paper might rip kind of easy. You can see I'm kind of trying to lift up my strips so that I can carefully slide this weft up. And look at it, just wanted to poke back down over here. So this is a little tricky and it can be a little frustrating to try for the first time, but try to get your strips as close as you can to possible and then start again. Now this is where you can create a greater pattern. I used my own paper, a magazine picture. Now maybe that AB pattern, maybe I want to use my own paper again. Last time I started by going under. Well, this is the opposite. Now I need to go over the first one, under the next one. So I'm doing the opposite. I'm going over, then under, over, and under, and finally last over. And you can see it kind of bubbled up a little bit, but guess what? You just take and pull the ends to make it tight again. So I'm going to continue doing this until I get to the bottom, and when I've done that, it looks like this. I'm checking, is it always the opposite of the one I did before? So I started by going over, under, over, under, over, under, over. Good. The next time I started, okay, I need to do the opposite of what I did, so I went under, then over, and kept going. Now here on the edges, I took some oil pastels. If you've got markers or crayons, I added a little design to the edges. I even took my scissors here and cut in little to make almost like fringe on the edge, so I could do that on this side too. So I just took my scissors and just cut little cuts in to make it look almost like fringe, and you've got yourself a weaving. Now, if you're really feeling up to trying something a little extra for my older students, especially for my 3rd and 4th graders, this is a weaving that I created where I actually did 2 colors on top of each other. You can try something like that. And then once I'd completed weaving in one direction, I took strips and then went over, under, through the pieces that were on top. So my 3rd and 4th graders, I would really love to see you maybe trying to layer 2 strips on top of each other to get some different colors, and then maybe even adding that bonus little strip. Now you also notice I did have some little scraps of yarn you can try that. Maybe my fourth graders, I'll tell you the yarn's a little bit trickier to use in this cardboard, but if you do have some scraps of yarn or fabric, you can give it a try. Just use what you have around the house, and you can see again, this is just a piece of cardboard from chicken tikka masala box, and the paper was just scraps of paper I had around the house. All right, thank you. I hope you enjoy creating a weaving this week. I look forward to seeing what you create at home. Take care.